Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is the Global Emergency Medicine Academy Introduction to Grant Writing Series. We are part of the Society of Academic Emergency Medicine, for those of you who are not as familiar. So this is our first virtual grant writing series, but it will not be our last. We look forward to doing more. So we encourage you to look into GEMA more and Society of Academic Emergency Medicine for membership. It focuses on the improvement of worldwide delivery of emergency care and aims to lead the advancement of academic emergency medicine by improving the global delivery of emergency care through research, education, and mentorship. So please look more into it, and we hope to tailor the next series more to the needs of our members. And so we look forward to your feedback. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists that we have today. They are experienced researchers and physicians in global health who have conducted research in various countries around the world. They are going to be able to help answer questions based on their extensive experience with research and grant writing. So I'm very happy to have them here. So I'm going to start with Dr. Uche Anigbogu. Dr. Uche Anigbogu works as an attending physician in the emergency department at George Washington University Hospital and is an assistant professor at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. She completed a fellowship in global emergency medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard University. She was also a fellow at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, working primarily with the health systems strengthening team. Her previous work focused on emergency care systems development, capacity building, and education in West Africa. She has done research in Nigeria, Togo, and Belize in infectious disease and medical anthropology. She aims to collaborate on the strengthening of emergency care both locally and globally, with a focus on West Africa through clinical work, consulting, and education. So thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist is Dr. Farouk Dako. He is an assistant professor of radiology in the cardiothoracic imaging division, a senior fellow in the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics, and a scholar in the Center for Global Health at the Perelman School of Medicine. His research focuses on population and global health, specifically the role that radiology can play in advancing health equity. He is also the director for the RAD-AID International Nigeria program. He is interested in the utilization of big data to improve health outcomes of traditionally underserved populations. Dr. Dako obtained a Master of Public Health from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He completed a surgical internship at the Mayo Clinic and diagnostic radiology residency at Temple University. He then completed a fellowship in cardiothoracic radiology and imaging informatics at the University of Maryland. So thank you so much for being here as well.
Pleasure to be here.
So a little bit about myself. My name is Emma Cortez. I'm a physician in both emergency medicine and family medicine. I work in emergency departments with Indian Health Service hospitals in Arizona, and I am currently clinical faculty with the Emergency Medicine and Family Medicine residency program at Jefferson Northeast. I am the founder and director of the nonprofit organization, the Migrant Health Collaborative of South Jersey, which focuses on increasing access to healthcare for migrant workers, typically from Central America and Haiti. I've had clinical experiences in Uganda, Nigeria, and the Philippines, and I have a history of being able to be a PI and co-PI on grant-funded projects. I'm going to be starting a fellowship in global emergency medicine at Brown this fall. And I would like to say that this is meant to be interactive, so if anybody has any questions at any time, feel free to type them into the chat. We'll try to address them as we go through. There will also be a section for questions at the end as well. So if your question is not answered throughout the presentation, you'll have time at the end to ask as well. So I wanted to start with a generalization of what we hope the course will be and what the course will not be, in order to provide reasonable expectations. So this course is an introductory series focused on the components of a formal grant proposal. We will provide resources and references for further learning, including from textbooks, handouts, and websites. And we will also provide resources to help you search for grants. This course will not completely cover all of the nuances of grant writing. It will not specifically speak to bench research or laboratory research, though these general concepts that we are going to discuss, once mastered, can be geared towards technical and quantitative research. And we will not be able to provide details about grant writing that are specific to different countries, but we will provide references for resources for grant seekers outside of the US. The course is going to be in 3 sessions. So today is the first session, so we will be giving a general overview of the grant components, talking about tips for grant writing in general. And then we will touch briefly on problem statements and investigative team credentials component. And then we will do a much more in-depth dive in composing the objectives section. Next week, we're going to be discussing how to compose a methods and experimental endpoints section and the budget section. And then finally, in the third session, we are going to be talking about finding sponsors, relationships with sponsors, pre-proposal contacts, planning proposals, different tips to help increase the success of your applications when you're submitting them, and then also provide different resources for searching for grants for different institutional and personal interests, specifically for those of us that are outside of the US. So the information in this presentation is largely from these 3 textbooks, which I highly recommend that you obtain if you are new to grant writing. The 2 on the left focus more on nonprofit and qualitative research, while the book on the right is focused on healthcare professionals that are writing for NIH grants. So each of them will talk about it from a different angle, and I find that to be really helpful, especially as you will write different kinds of grants for different kind of institutions. But all 3 of them go much more in depth into every component of grant writing and even address searching for funding, letter proposals, and abstracts. And they also provide a great deal of examples and proposal samples to help guide you through the process. And we will have some handouts from the middle textbook there that we will be able to provide. So the definition of a grant, it's a giving of funds for a specific purpose. It's not a gift or a charity. It's a relationship between grantor and grantee, an exchange relationship. And this exchange varies with the type of grant making organization. Why even start pursuing grant funding? So this can advance scientific knowledge in your field and advance your professional career. A grant means a contribution to the financial health of your department, school, or agency. A grant can mean new opportunities for you and your research assistants, or a grant can mean a new program that otherwise would be too expensive for your institution to support and implement. So a strong proposal, if they're well written, well organized, and concise, can bring in substantial income for your organizational programs and research. Leadership questions that should be assessed prior to submitting the proposal are, are the purpose and goals well defined? Are there solid financial procedures or systems in place, such as the ability to effectively track, monitor, and report on how it expends both restricted and unrestricted grants? Is the necessary staff available to ensure the goals and objectives can be delivered? Is the leadership prepared to do what it takes to meet the requirements that come with receiving a grant funding, such as producing quarterly, semi-annual, or annual progress reports, conducting program evaluations, participating in special training, attending meetings or conferences, which can depend on if the funding relates to a specific initiative of foundation? Is there solid access to required technology? An honest assessment needs to be made if the basic technology is available to carry out the project. So always prepare for project ideas and prepare for grant seeking by reading the current literature regarding the type of research you aim to pursue. You should have an idea of what was done before and what is currently being done to address the same issue that you aim to research. So there are different kinds of proposals. We are going to be talking about formal proposals, but I wanted to touch base on the other kinds. So a letter proposal is often requested by corporations, and it's typically a 3 to 4 page description of the project plan, organization, or project team, and the actual dollar amount request. In the letter proposal, grant seekers are actually requesting specific funds, whereas in a letter of intent, grant seekers are only introducing their idea to the funder in order to determine whether the funder has any interest in receiving a more detailed proposal. So the letter of intent is a 2-page summary. Typically, there is a specific number of pages, and it's a brief description of the project, whether to ask for a full proposal. And then a letter of inquiry is similar to the letter proposal, except it's not in the form of a letter of inquiry, and it is a structured layout that usually includes contact, organization, request, and project information. So a formal proposal is what we'll be talking about, and it has many different components. So the cover letter, which is a short letter that accompanies the proposal and briefly describes its significance. The executive summary, or also called a proposal summary, is overview of the entire proposal and usually limited to 1 to 2 pages. The problem statement, also called statement of need or need statement, is a compelling description of the need to be addressed by the grant seeker. Organization background or qualifications or investigative team credentials. This is a presentation of the grant seeker's qualifications to carry out the proposed project. Goals and objectives, a description of what the project team ultimately hopes to accomplish with the program and describing the specific results or outcome to be accomplished. Methods, a description of the program, services, and activities that will achieve the desired results. Evaluation, a plan for how you will evaluate the accomplishments of the program. Sustainability, a presentation of the grant seeker's strategies for developing additional funding to continue the program after the initial grant funding period is over. And then the budget, which is a line item summary and narrative of program revenues and expenses. So this is from that textbook, Successful Grant Writing by Gitlin. And that one focuses more on writing educational grants and NIH grants. So if you notice here, there's different titles for the sections that we just went over, such as goals and objectives can also be called specific aims, or the background is also called significance. Although these different components have many different names depending on the kind of grant that you're applying for, all of the proposals end up having the same exact components regardless. So now I'm just going to give a brief advice on how to write these sections. I wish we had more time to be able to go in depth more into these, but we want to focus more on the goals and objectives today. So tips that are really important to remember for grant writing in general is to follow the grant guidelines. Proposals can be dismissed on a technicality, so following the explicit format that grant makers request is really important. Getting the facts straight, so making sure data is relevant and up to date to support the need for your project. Being aware that grant makers read the executive summary first, then followed by the budget. So every single component is equally as important because you don't know which component the grant reviewer may start with. And oftentimes it is starting with the budget and the executive summary. You want to keep it simple and straightforward, and you want to avoid jargon or acronyms, any specialized words. You want to make it easy for someone who is not an expert in the field to be able to read and understand the entire proposal. So if you do use an acronym or a specific term, you want to make sure that it's explained. You want to make it easy for the reviewer to follow along using headings, subheadings, bullets, so that they're able to follow your thought process. And using tables, charts, and graphs will also help that as well. So try to be visual when you can. You want to get honest feedback on the proposal before submitting it to the funder, so have other people read your application before it's submitted. Remember that one size does not fit all, meaning once you write the proposal, you can't use the same proposal for every application because you want to tailor it specifically for different funders. And then planning ahead, which is very important. Grant seeking processes typically operate within 6 to 9 month windows, and each funder operates to its own schedule. So developing a calendar with a list of all the deadlines would be very helpful. So the problem statement, essentially it's asking the question, why do this project? So effective grants can produce change. Your problem statement describes precisely and persuades why change is necessary. To persuade proposal reviewers that you have identified a significant problem, you must present 2 data points or lines that are separated by a gap. So, you're trying to identify where the gap is in this problem. Therefore, your project will fill in that gap and be the resolution to it. Although this should be brief, it is necessary to cite data from sources such as national studies or reports and statements from professional groups that support the public health concern that you're talking about, for example. It is important to define the problem from the perspective of the funder. So sponsors will fund you because you can be an agent for change to solve the problems that they consider important. And sponsors, their goal is to fund their needs, not yours, and they strive to fund actual needs, not opportunities. So essentially that means when you write your problem statement, you want to think about it from the perspective of the funder. What is the main mission of this foundation or organization? What are the problems that they are trying to address? So, if they have a focus on malnutrition, you don't want to be writing about a problem related to cardiac disease because that's not in their interest. So, you want to tailor the problem to be something that they also would feel is a problem because it's related to their field. So in this section, you're also going to be trying to discuss the frequency of the problem, the severity of the problem, and the consequence of not addressing the problem. You want to use statistics that are clear and document the current need or problem. If applicable, try and use statistics specific to the community, city, or state that the project will be implemented in. Use comparative statistics and research where possible, using data from a community institution that did something very similar and citing the benefits that were brought on by that project. You want to quote authorities and experts on the topic. Be sure to cite the person and source where the quote was found. For example, if it's from a peer-reviewed journal or a textbook, you want to make sure that that's documented. And you want to provide appropriate backup information that demonstrates why this source or expert is an authority on this subject. Make sure all the data collection is well documented. So using the reputable sources, if you do use websites, you want to use websites that are more .org or governmental websites or well-respected organizations such as the UN or WHO. Make sure all the data is current. Use the most recent research available on a subject. Research changes very quickly and it's a fast-growing field. So research that is only 10 years old can be seen as significantly outdated because a lot has happened since then. So you want to find the most recent research related to your topic. Give a clear sense of urgency of the request. Funders need to understand why the funding is important right now. And it's possible that the stakeholders are unaware of the problem. So, you want to express that urgency if they didn't know this was even an issue. And you should regard the problem statement as extremely important to whether or not your proposal will be persuasive. So as I was saying, every component is critical on its own. And this component is very important because if you cannot convince the funder that there is a problem, they are not going to see the need to fund your project. So questions you want to ask yourself after you write your problem statement would be, is a problem statement focused on those who will be served by the program and not your institution? So you want it to be focused on helping others and not just for self-gain and promotion. If the project is associated with an organization or an institution, does the problem statement directly connect to the organization or institution's mission statement? Is it in line with what you normally do? If you say you're focusing on cardiac disease and this is a project related to malnutrition, like I was saying, it's going to be confusing for the funder why you are focusing on doing this project. Given the project team's size and resources, can it address the problem that was stated in a meaningful way? Is the problem statement adequately supported by solid and reputable quantitative and qualitative data on the nature, size, and scope of the need to be addressed? Is it concise and simple? And is the problem statement persuasive without being too wordy? So this is a worksheet that comes from one of those textbooks. It's just a helpful questionnaire that can kind of help guide you to writing the problem statement. If you're able to answer these questions, you can then easily put it together in a paragraph and be able to make sure that you're hitting all the important things that you want to express. So the organization background, for most grant applications, it is necessary to include a description highlighting the role of each member of the proposed project team and his or her qualifications. Grant instructions will determine if this is to be a paragraph or a longer section. Sometimes they want just a paragraph. So this is the chance to describe the project team in order to demonstrate that the team is meeting an unmet need in the research medical community, that they are fiscally secure, they're well managed, and understand the community it serves. The questions that you want to be able to answer with your background is, does the organization background section give the project team credibility by stating its history, specific qualifications, purpose, target population, and major accomplishments? Does the background suggest the source of community or institutional support for the proposed program? Does this section highlight any awards received or any previous funding that may have been received? So this is the opportunity to explain why you and your team are the best people to be assessing this problem. And it gives the funder confidence that you have the previous experience and expertise to be able to approach this problem. So that's all we're going to be able to talk about for those two sections. But as I was saying, if you look into the textbooks, there's much more in-depth sections in there about this. Okay, so goal is what the program or project aspires to achieve, and the objectives or how an organization will know if it's meeting its goals. Both goals and objectives are directly tied to the problem statement. The interrelated grant concepts that are not well understood by many grant makers and grant seekers are goals, objectives, and outcomes. They're similar terms in the sense that they all focus on the grant deliverables. However, they differ based on their time as well as their detail. So this chart kind of gives an idea of the differences between goals, objectives, and outcomes. So these are all terms that if you tried to look them up in the dictionary, they would all be very similar and would probably have the other words within their own definition. But in the grant writing world, they have very different meanings. And it's very important not to confuse them because the grant reviewer may not take you seriously if they see you're not able to differentiate differentiate between them. Goals are more, what is your team or organization or institution, what are they trying to achieve in general? Why do they exist? So this is over the entire lifespan of this institution or team. This is the overarching goal of an organization. The objectives is what will actually happen throughout the project period. And then the outcomes are the observable change that you are able to see and evaluate based on the objectives. And these will have specific dates and times which you will state in the proposal. So goals represent the big picture of what you want to achieve. They are not quantifiable or observable. For example, goals in a recent health education proposal included these statements: to analyze the special needs of underserved populations and to develop new programs to meet those needs, to extend services to underserved target populations, to integrate new educational materials, and then the last one is for special focus programs. All of these goals are valuable, but they cannot stand by themselves, so they should be followed by behaviors. Objectives specify the end products of your project. Objectives focus on the outcome, the actual change, versus the process of how that change will be made, which is describing the methods section. Because if you look, when you're describing your project, it's going to be answering the questions of who, what, where, why, when, and how. So the who and the where is the target population or who you're trying to help and focus here to help with the need. The why is going to be the problem statement. Why are you doing this? Why are you targeting this population to address this need? The what and when is what your objectives are. So what is it that actually is going to occur during this project? Then how is a detailed description of how you are going to execute those objectives. And then the end point will be the observed change that you're able to evaluate and analyze. You can use that to help your project in the future. So again, we're going to talk a little bit more about objectives in this section. So I thought that this was a helpful way to look at this, that funders are buying your objectives. So you want to put it simply, the reason why any kind of funders are giving you grant funding is because they want to bring your objectives into fruition. So that's why it typically has to align with what the organization or what the foundation wants. That's why you want the problem to be seen from their perspective. And, that's why you want it to seem manageable and feasible, because they are not going to buy those objectives unless that's the case. So this section is meant to articulate what key areas the project is seeking to change. It's going to be talking about when this change will take place and how many months or years. There are different kinds of objectives. You may hear different terms. You may hear the term objective outcome, which is focusing on the outcome as the name implies. And then there's process objective, which is going to be focusing on what you will be doing. So you can see the difference here in the outcome objective. It's much more detailed, saying in the next year, a minimum of 80 new patients who complete the program will increase their confidence in their role as a teacher, as evidenced by achieving at least 90% on their final parenting quiz. Whereas the process objective is, the whole objective is to recruit 120 parents for parent education courses. There are two different acronyms for writing objectives that you'll see. SMART is one that you'll hear very often. Simple is another one, which I think is pretty helpful. Overall, they're very similar. Whichever one you want to use, SMART or simple, they will help guide you in writing the objectives. So you want specific. When we say specific, we want you to show precisely what you intend to change through your project. What will be different when the project is finished in the media? Indicate the time frame during which a current problem will be addressed, and how long will it take to achieve your goals and objectives. Measurable, specifying what you would accept as proof of project success. What qualitative and quantitative data are you going to gather, and what tools will you use to measure project success. Practical, pointing out how each objective is a real solution to a real problem. Are your objectives realistic? Does your team, organization, or institution have the skill, experience, qualification, resource, and personnel to carry out each objective? Logical, describe how each objective systematically contributes to achieve your overall goals. Do your objectives relate to your goal and the sponsor's priorities? Does it make sense to do it? Does it tie into the problem that you described? Evaluable, what are your criteria for success? What impact will your project make? So here's an example of an objective. The Midwest Home Shelter Agency will increase the number of homeless people who transition into dependent and independent housing during the next 24 months by 15%, as noted in the Department of Social Welfare Homeless Survey Report. So specific, they are specifically focusing on increasing the number of homeless people that are transitioning into the housing. That's a very focused objective. So practical, it makes sense, and it's something that is reasonable and feasible to do if homelessness is their focus. Logical, again, it ties into the problem that they already discussed in the problem statement. So by saying the next 24 months is giving that time frame and when it's going to occur. Evaluable, so they think they'll be able to increase it by 15%. This is an actual number that they will be able to determine whether or not it was 15% or 10% or more. Measurable, they are going to be using the Department of Social Welfare Homeless Survey report. So it is something that will actually provide data that they can actually look at to be able to evaluate it. So just going through, it's the same thing if you want to use the SMART. So it's specific, relevant to their mission statement, time bound, saying the next 24 months allows for a time frame to take place in the reviewer's mind. 15% is achievable. They're saying that we want to increase independent housing by 15%, as opposed to saying we want to increase it by 100%. We want to completely solve the problem. That may not be achievable or realistic. And so you want to show that you have a more grounded understanding of the actual problem and what can actually be done. Measurable, similar to the other acronym. So you are specifically stating how you will be able to see that data. So here's another example. And again, these are more focused on qualitative research, but I think if you can understand the concepts in this frame, it's going to be a lot easier to apply it to very specific kinds of research because it's going to be more straightforward. So if the goal is for our theater to be enjoyed by all of our communities, that's the goal. Objective, 50% of our Asian Pacific Islander audience will increase their attendance from 1 show per year to 2 shows by the end of the year. That relates to the fact that they're saying that they want everybody to enjoy the theater, and they're going to focus specifically on Asian Pacific Islander audiences. It will increase by 50% and from 1 show to 2. So that, again, that's a SMART objective, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and specific. So outcomes are the benefits, the changes or effects that will occur due to the occurrence of your project. So if objectives are the what, then outcomes are the so what. Why do we care that that's what you did? Why should we be interested in you performing these activities? Sponsors want to know that their funds are being spent wisely and that your project is really making a difference in the focus of their field. So it's going to be answering questions, what are the potential benefits of this action occurring? So for example, grant funders may want to know the change that will occur in grant participants' attitudes, behaviors, or actions, or something that will create a change beyond the life of the project. So for example, if the objective is to provide firefighters with new communications and personal protective equipment, the outcome will be firefighters will increase coordinated service delivery to the community and decrease average response time. Are there any questions so far? I know I'm moving a little bit fast. I just wanted to make sure that we're able to cover everything in our time frame. Okay, so another example, if the objective is to conduct 10 cultural sensitivity training courses, then the outcome will be employees will respect and value diversity. An objective of enrolling 6,000 at-risk members in several courses. The outcome will be students' academic performance will improve. So if your project is to enroll these students in this class, that funders are going to know, so why should we care that that's what you did? Well, going to improve the academic performance of the students. These are more examples. So specifically providing 10,000 meals to low-income senior citizens, then the outcome will be senior citizens are able to remain in independent living. So again, you're being specific with the objective, but then more general with the outcome. So there are objectives that can have multiple outcomes, and they may or may not be similar. So have 60 undergraduate university students contribute a total of 3,600 hours of service learning projects at the Hispanic Community Center. So outcome number 1 is going to be students will make real-world connections to the local community through service, educational outreach, and employment. Outcome number 2 would be continuing education adults at the Hispanic Community Center will earn their GED diplomas. So because of your objective, because of the action that you're doing, these are the 2 outcomes that you are going to assess and look at and that you're expecting to occur because of the action that you're doing. And again, you can have multiple outcomes for each process objective. So I think this example is taken from a blood center seeking private foundation funding for a hemophilia proposal. So if their goal is to provide modern care for all persons affected by hemophilia, related bleeding disorders, and complications of those disorders or their treatment, including HIV infections, by the target date of July 1st, 2020, 4 objectives will be met. So again, it's specific. They're looking specifically at persons affected by hemophilia, and it is measurable because they're going to be looking at complications and related disorders of their treatment. And it is time bound. So it's going to be, when is it going to be doing it? By a target date of July 1st, and then relevant to their focus, which is if it's a blood center, then focusing on hemophilia patients makes sense. So the objective will be 90% of the identified persons with hemophilia at risk of HIV infection enrolled in comprehensive care programs will be tested for HIV status, appropriate pre and post testing counseling with maximum considering to confidentiality. So again, the outcome is just describing why do we care, that's what you're going to be testing and looking at. And as I said, in those textbooks, they provide a lot more examples that we're not going to have time to go through, but I think looking at as many examples as you can is going to help give you an understanding of what it is your proposal should be expressing, and also how to write it. It can be in a paragraph format like this, with the goal and then the objectives listed underneath of it. So objectives and outcomes produce change, but how much change is reasonable to expect as a result of a grant project? How do you know to say 15% of the homeless population as opposed to 100%? So it can set your application apart if you can define for reviewers not only what changes your projects aim to affect, but also the degree of that change. So there are 6 strategies that I'm going to list that you can use to justify a specific amount of change if it's realistic. So reviewing the literature. After examining major works published in books and scholarly articles, you may be able to situate your anticipated outcomes in this larger context. So for example, the research from Smith 2021 and Adams 2020 confirm that 12 to 17% reduction can be expected from this type of primary prevention program. So using reputable literature is going to help support your claim. You can run a pilot project. So conducting the project on a small scale can demonstrate proof of concept before attempting it on a full scale. So that would be, the example of this could be used. A small scale pilot implemented over the past 6 months suggests that compared with current models, a 27 to 32% increase in second language acquisition and fluency can be achieved with English language learners. So you can look at other models. When your approach is so new or original that there's no baseline for comparison, you can use analogies to be able to support your claim. So comparing your program with a different program, although the specifics of it may be different, you can use that to argue your point that these are the changes that you would expect to see with your program. Solicit expert testimony. Congress regularly solicits expert testimony from individuals and organizations to provide authoritative perspectives on significant issues, which you can too. So, using the statement of an expert will make sense as to why you're saying, 50% improvement in 6 weeks participation. Invoke professional opinion. So even if you don't consider yourself an expert, it may be that you are in the best position to make a well-informed prediction. So based on 30 years of experience working directly with more than 19,000 children and families in these rural counties, it is conceivable that an 8% increase is achievable in the first year. So you're using your own experience in order to justify that. And then conduct statistical analyses. In some instances, you want to quantify the amount of change. Statistical analyses might demonstrate that the change from the baseline will be statistically significant. So another way of saying it would be, given the large size of the sample population, the independent evaluator will have the power to determine a statistical significance at P of 0.001. So you're using that to back up why you're saying what you're saying. So general tips for writing these sections: you don't want to have more than 1 to 3 objectives per goal because you want your process to be manageable. And I always say you want to promise and over deliver. So you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. Don't confuse outcome objectives with methods or activities. So collaborating with community center to expand the program and keep costs low, that's a method because you're discussing the exact detail of how you're going to be keeping the costs low. Whereas describing it as expanding XYZ program to the university is going to result in 100 students completing the program over the course of 2022. So it's steering away from sounding like the methods where you're going to be explaining how it refocuses on what is going to happen. So by the end, your goals and objectives section should be able to answer the questions. Can it clearly describe your project objectives, hypothesis, and or research question? Identify observable behaviors that can be measured. So that's going to be the outcomes. Signal project goals and objectives without burying them in too much narrative, being concise. Demonstrate that your objectives are important, significant, and timely. Do they directly address the problem that you described in the previous section? Do they demonstrate why your project outcomes are appropriate and important to the sponsor? Reflect the need for the project and show clearly its purpose and direction. Include one or more objectives for each need discussed in the problem statement or paragraph. State objectives in terms of outcomes and not methods or activities, and state the time by which the objectives will be accomplished. So it should be able to answer all of those questions. This is another worksheet that can kind of help you sort your thoughts and then be able to put it into a paragraph. So we were saying that sometimes there needs to be a lot of planning. So this is part of the planning process before you write the proposal itself. Are there any questions? I know that was a lot. Does anybody have anybody want to share any experiences that they've had with any of these sections in particular? So looking at this and having studied this more, there are grants that I've received partial funding for, but now that I've reviewed this, it makes sense to me why that was the case. And I think it's because I didn't have very specific objectives as I could. See, Dr. Jocko or Dr. Enigbo, do you have any you want to share about this, about any advice about these sections from your perspective?
In particular, I think this most recent point that you brought up about not overpromising has been something that I've had to deal with in the past. It's easy to think that by setting more objectives that meets the mission and the vision of the grants, that you are increasing your likelihood of getting the grant. But what can end up happening is later down the line, this is just the beginning that we're starting to talk about, but later down the line, you realize that trying to effectively and efficiently achieve all the objectives that you've set out becomes more challenging and makes for inefficient administration of the grant if you were to get it. So I fully agree in that you want to be intentional about what you commit yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and it may, by giving too many objectives, it may say to the funder that you are being unrealistic and that you don't really know what you're capable of. So it can backfire if you have too many objectives.
Yes.
Right. No, I definitely agree with that point. I think we've all made those mistakes of trying to fit too much into one proposal. And I think one of the best advice I got early on was that a proposal is part scientific, part marketing / advertising, right? So you want to wear that hat, right? Like if you watch a commercial, they're pretty precise as to what they're trying to get you to think at that time, right? A commercial is trying to have you think about too many things at once is going to lose you. So I think it's normal for us to want to try to say too much. I mean, you're writing a proposal, you're passionate about it, you have all these thoughts, you have all the things you want to do. So I think this probably the most difficult part is really just taking all those ideas and saying, no, this is what I'm going to focus on, and being able to resist, not essentially treating it like you would treat it in a conversation where you keep telling the person the other things you want to do and how this ties to that. You really want to keep it simple. And I think, as Dr. Cortez mentioned, you want to assume that the reviewers don't know much about the topic, right? So, keeping it simple, keeping it relatable, and most importantly, making sure you're taking time to read the details of the request for submission, right? Like we often don't read that enough to really get a strong sense of what exactly you're looking for and to tailor your goals and objectives to be specifically in line with that and the grading rubric. So that's just to think about.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you, like you're saying, if you're saying objectives that have nothing to do with the foundation, they're not going to want to buy your objectives. And I really do think that phrase, the funders are buying your objectives, has really helped reframe how I look at this in terms of what you're trying to exchange with funders. So like I said, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I know we're running out of time, but our next session is next week, February 8th, and we're going to be going into an in-depth discussion about the methods and the experimental end section, and then also the budget section, which has always been the bane of my existence, but only now I feel more comfortable with it. So, and we will have Dr. Wu with us, as well as Dr. Adam Alucio. I did want to add that I can share the slides and handouts with you guys has, because we have your emails, so I can send them out. I think those worksheets are actually really helpful to kind of get your mind going and give you a place to start when it comes to these type of. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really hope that all of you are back again next week and as we go and discuss further. And then if you have any questions, say you think of some in a few days, I can write them down and you can ask at the next section and we'd be happy to answer them as well. So that's my email address. If anybody has any other direct questions, you can also feel free to email me and I can be happy to help as much as I can. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Enigbogu, and thank you, Dr. Dako, for joining us.
Take care.
All
Thank
right,
you.
well, guys, next week.